Join us on the program right now from PsyID. John Cardillo is with us. John, thank you, sir, for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, thanks for the invite back on.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about your piece before the last break, and we were serenaded by Katrina and the Waves. And this is a great article at the Blaze. I would strongly encourage everybody to read what you had to say about how you used to come for your guns. Now you support your right to defend yourself. So you were a New York police officer back in the late 80s, early 90s?
In the early 90s.
Up until when?
In the early 90s, until right before 9/11. So worked through the 90s and through the Dinkins and Giuliani administrations.
Okay, and so you worked in the Bronx at a 46th precinct?
Yep, up in the 46th precinct.
And as you say, this was it was a rough neighborhood. It's called the Alamo. That was the precinct. Time Magazine, the most dangerous square mile in America. And you describe how you went in as let's say a typical New Yorker, not thinking much about guns, but if you did, you're thinking people don't really need them.
Well, right. I mean, culturally. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were finishing.
Yeah. Go ahead. Elaborate.
Well, culturally, growing up in New York City, I grew up in Queens and then moved to Manhattan. Guns just aren't on the radar, right? It's not something, you're not out hunting every weekend. You don't live on a big piece of property where you've got your 22 as a kid and you're shooting out the back door, like a lot of my friends now did growing up. So it wasn't that I was ever anti-gun. My dad, we'd go to the rifle range, and we were into that kind of thing. And my friends and I would go, and I had 22 when I was young, and that sort of thing. But attention wasn't paid to the Second Amendment, to what it really meant, to gun rights, to personal protection. You when you grow up in a city, you're sort of preconditioned to believe that politicians have your best interest at heart. And even when you think you're a Republican, you're really not. I live in Florida now for the last 10 years, and I look at where I've evolved politically, let alone on this issue, and I understand just how far left you are by birth and default when you grow up in a place like New York, because you really don't know any other way. And so that when I went into the academy, I went into the academy believing, I believe in people's rights, but I also bought into, regretfully, the fact that those talking points, that if you have a gun, someone will take it and use it on you, and the police are trained, and they should be the ones with firearms.
Okay, so I got to ask you, all of a sudden then, hitting the streets as a cop, you say, within the first few hours of you working, you were thrust into some really violent crimes, having to respond to some really bad things.
Oh, yeah, and that was just the nature of that area. To give you an idea, the precinct is 1 square mile, and back then we would turn out 10, 12 cars on a busy weekend night. To put it in perspective, down here, the Florida Highway Patrol probably turns out 1 car for 24 square miles. And so, you're talking about a tremendous amount of coverage and so much crime that every patrol car, every team was backed up on the radio. And at the same time, I started evolving and becoming a bit more politically engaged. And so those two things happened at once. I didn't put that in the Blaze article because, just for brevity, they sort of like us to stay under or around 1,200 words. And it was hard to get all my thoughts in. But I also started to evolve politically a little bit. I started looking more at what the Constitution meant and what my oath as a police officer meant and, how all these things tied in together. And as you do that and you start to realize the importance and the brilliance of the Constitution, and at the same time you're seeing confrontations every day at work, violent ones and horrible ones, rapes and robberies and child molestations and murders and attempted murders. And you realize that these hundreds of incidents that you're responding to and seeing, the very few people in New York City that were legally allowed to own guns came away unscathed. But everybody else was beaten, bloodied, or dead. Well, it doesn't take a political scientist to start to put two and two together and say, hey, wait a second, the common denominator is the person with the gun in these incidents typically emerged the winner.
And you write about this. You say that there was an incident, the first incident where you had to draw your gun, you were shot at, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a snowy night. You weren't sure if your rounds hit the guy. His didn't hit you. K-9 ultimately comes and and tackles a guy, and you say, I began to think, if they don't care about killing cops, that mom dropping her kid to the school bus doesn't stand a chance. She needs a gun too. And I got to say, John, I was really struck by that because, a typical New York politician or an anti-gun politician would take this incident and say, and John Cardillo needs to know that he can go about his appointed rounds without being shot. And so we need to pass this this tough but common sense gun reform law to make sure that John Cardillo is safe on the job. They would not have said, there are people out there who are so violent and whacked out of their gourds that they don't care if they kill a cop. So you're right. The soccer mom, the mom picking up her kid, the guy doing his job at the corner grocery store, they don't stand a chance.
Oh, at all. And it wasn't, unfortunately, that wasn't the first time I had to draw my gun. It was the first time I had to pull the trigger. I mean, we drew our gun nightly. It was that bad of an area, whether it was on a felony car stop or responding to some shots fired for someone else. But what I was struck by, and what I think people need to understand, what I'd like to impart during this time is, in these areas, in these very bad areas, there is an incredible lack of disrespect for everyone, not just authority, not just the police, but me and you. I'm just a regular old private citizen like everybody else for the last 12, 13 years now, and criminals don't care about us. They don't care about the police. They don't care about us. They just want to take what we have or hurt us. It doesn't matter if we're wearing a badge, a gun, a uniform. If they're bent on committing that crime or hurting someone, they're going to mow down anyone in their way. And so as I saw more and more and more and more of that, I came to that realization, and that little soundbite, that little talking point you mentioned about the mom on the bus stop, I actually did use that in my head because I remember the imagery. I would see these people walking their kids to school and these elderly people. There's a lot of good people in bad neighborhoods that are just like everybody
Absolutely.
else.
Absolutely. I say that myself, John.
I'm sorry?
I said I say that exact thing, that even in the worst of neighborhoods, we've got more good people than bad.
Oh, sure, because these are the hardest working people working for the lowest wage. These are the working poor that are the ones bussing your tables and cleaning the backs of your restaurants. These are honest, decent people making a very honest living. And unfortunately, that was really what motivated me. I hated those gangsters that would prey on these people, and so it kept me very motivated because I took very personally when these people were being brutalized. I mean, that was they expected us to come and help them. We had to do that, but when you realize that you're essentially reactive, I mean, it's the very rare moment. I was having a debate on Facebook earlier with someone about this who told me, you advocate violence. And I responded to her. I said, well, you're absolutely right. I wholeheartedly advocate violence as a means to stop other violence. If my violence is going to stop the criminal who's engaging in violence, then you got me. I support that all day long. And I really firmly believe that individuals need to be armed because I can't recall the amount of times, it was a handful, Cam, that we were able to get there and intervene in a crime in progress. I mean, it's a rare day and on television where that happens.
No, you're right. It is. And I've found, John, that, and you point this out as well. You say, I find that many of us who patrolled the worst areas have become the most vehement spokespeople for the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates, again, they love to point to chiefs of police proclaiming their support for gun control laws. They don't tend to call out rank and file officers for supporting gun control laws because most of them don't, and most of them don't feel like they can speak out in support of the right to keep bear arms if their chief is anti-gun. But if you're and this has been my experience as well. I covered crime in Oklahoma City as a reporter for a number of years, and so became fairly well known with some of the officers. And again, I don't recall meeting a single one of them who was anti-gun. They all had the attitude of, we would much rather roll up on a situation where someone was able to protect themselves than roll up on a situation where someone was not.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I mean, chiefs of police tend to be political animals, right? And, with all due respect to what I'm sure are dozens and hundreds of good chiefs of police, at the end of the day, they're appointees. And the most prominent ones, the ones we always know about, are the New York City Police Commissioner, the Chief of LAPD, the Chicago Police Chief, et cetera. They're serving very anti-gun administration. So these guys aren't going to walk into their interview with the mayor, going for that top cop job and say, yep, I'm a vehement, rabid Second Amendment supporter, because they're going to say thanks but no thanks. And then they're certainly not going to do that once they get the job, because they'll be removed the next morning. And so to wonder or to try to gauge how your police chief is going to be on the Second Amendment, just look at your mayor if it's an area where they're appointed. But I am encouraged by what I'm seeing from many of the constitutionally elected sheriffs around the country. They seem more and more to be taking a better position on this.
I would agree with that. Yeah, no, I think that they are. And again, look, the gun control advocates say, well, that's because they're political animals too. They're beholden to the voters. I would rather, again, I'm going to trust somebody who feels like they have to speak their mind to the voters, or at least pay attention to what the constituents believe in their jurisdiction, than again, someone who feels like they can't speak their mind. In fact, it's interesting. We were talking with the chief of police in Detroit, Chief James Craig, a few weeks ago, and he too said exactly what you said, John, that he knows chiefs who feel like they can't speak up because of the position that they're in. They agree with Chief Craig. He's been an outspoken supporter of the Second Amendment and the right to carry. But Detroit is a different vehicle. They don't have a mayor right now. They've basically got a guy who's been appointed to run it, and Chief Craig doesn't have the same political considerations that a lot of other chiefs would. I think that inhibits that conversation.
Oh, I do, and I have to tell you, I agree with you. I've been a fan of his since I first started reading about him. When I saw the mess that Detroit was, I almost felt bad for him, but I expected him to be just another liberal big city police chief. Every time he opens his mouth, I'm more impressed. I mean, he's really one of the rare good guys in police administration right now, in my opinion, anyway. He's a very pragmatic approach and a very intelligent approach to everything.
I would agree with you on that. All right, so listen, we've got a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask you, because you say that a good friend of yours, Detective Anthony Angeli, another alumni of the 46th Precinct, retired from Manhattan North Narcotics. You said you asked him how he came to be pro-Second Amendment. He got stabbed in the chest at one point, you say, and he said, in all my years as a city detective, I never encountered a licensed gun owner using a firearm in a negative way. I've been in several shootings. I was also stabbed in the chest. I'm not anti-knife. Now, again, the gun control advocate would say, well, the reason why you never encountered a licensed gun owner, or why Detective Angeli never encountered a licensed gun owner using a firearm in a negative way, is because the licensing standards are so restrictive in New York. But if we were to do what you wanted to do, John, and just let anybody in some bad neighborhood go out and exercise their right to keep and bear arms, well, crime would go through the roof, and then maybe you and Detective Angeli would change your mind.
Well, the counter to that is pretty easy, right? He's been retired to Florida for quite some time now as well, and gave me that quote yesterday or the night before. as a longtime Florida resident with very gun-friendly laws, and I belong to several law enforcement groups on Facebook where there are officers from all over the country, and a vast majority from states down south and out west that have similar, if not better, gun laws than Florida. They all feel the same to a man and woman. And so my counter would be to the antis who make that argument, you're absolutely wrong, go and speak to these cops. His point with that quote was within the context of, while at NYPD, I would even argue that all of us have become more pro-gun since leaving and then moving to places like Florida where everybody has a gun in their house. And now we lead the nation. What I read the other day is we lead the nation in concealed weapons licenses. I think we have 1.2 million issued here. And it's a pretty friendly, relatively safe place to be. I don't see illegal gun owners going around shooting each other over parking spots. So, if anything, living in a place like this has even strengthened my resolve to be committed to defending and advocating for the Second Amendment.
It seems like, look, I'd love to see the gun laws changed in New York City, but I think along with that, you talked about the gun culture. It would have to be more than just simply. It would be a great first step to say, we're going to respect the right to keep and bear arms, but people need a chance to go to the range. They need an opportunity. They need those places. I mean, you look at Chicago, where Mayor Emanuel is fighting tooth and nail to stop gun stores from opening up, and there are no ranges opening up in Chicago. And he thinks that if they keep guns as some taboo thing, that somehow that's going to reduce crime. And they've been trying this for decades, John. That's what's so frustrating is that they've been trying this for generations of criminals, and it hasn't worked.
It goes further than that, Cam. I don't know if you realize this, and I'm sure many of you listeners, my apologies, don't. If you don't have a pistol license in New York State, in the area surrounding the city, and I guess in most other counties, and in New York City in particular, you can't even go into a shop and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a pistol license. Can I take a look at that Glock 19? You're not even allowed to hold the unloaded G19 handed to you by the gun store manager if you don't already have the license. I mean, so culturally, they make it that taboo.
Wow. So you're not even allowed to express an interest.
You can look at it through the case. Long guns all day long. And that's where New York City has some weird counterintuitive gun laws. You can go, and I don't know how it is under the SAFE Act because I haven't checked, but growing up, pistols were taboo. But if I went to Nassau, Suffolk, or Westchester counties, the counties that border New York City, I could buy a rifle or a shotgun with a driver's license and walk out with it right then and there, no waiting period. Their laws on those were as good as anywhere else in the country. If you have a pistol license, the NICS is waived in those counties. So when you buy it, you don't have to wait for the phone call. So in some ways, they're draconian, but in others, with long guns, they were some of the most lax. And people really didn't realize that. But it's interesting. Even if you leave New York City, you go 20 miles out in Nassau County, 40 miles into Suffolk or up in Westchester, there's a gun culture because there's space, there are outdoor ranges, there are things like that. But as you mentioned, in New York City, it's pretty much impossible to open a range or a gun shop. Same as Chicago and D.C.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. I mean, there are no, D.C. is the same way. I mean, they've written the rules in such a way that you can't, theoretically, you could open up a gun store, but there are no gun stores. There's one guy, there's one FFL in the District of Columbia who does transfers, and he's set up right there. He's set up right there in police headquarters. He's got a great deal. Why change anything? And the idea of a range opening up. I mean, look, there are all kinds of ranges in Washington, D.C., for law enforcement officers to use, but none for the public to use. And go ahead.
I was going to say, in putting that FFL in police headquarters probably deters 80% of the people who just don't want to deal with the police on that level.
I'm sure. The entire process. I mean, as you know, in New York, and the entire process in D.C. is very much the same thing. It is designed, I think, to inhibit people from going through the process. If you got to make multiple trips down to police headquarters, it's going to be a month-long process, hundreds of dollars in extra fees. A lot of people are going to throw up their hands and say, forget it.
I don't, you're not speculating. I can tell you from people I've worked with. I'm the last guy that likes hearsay or anecdotal. But I'll tell you, cops that I work with who were assigned to Pistol License Division temporarily or for longer will tell you, look, our unit exists to deny you. We don't want you having guns. So we make the paperwork as difficult as possible. We make the process as tedious as possible. We'll send you paperwork back for a typo if you don't use the right color pen, if you use the wrong whiteout on the form. I mean, they exist to deny applications, not approve them.
Yeah. Listen, John, we got to run, but I appreciate you coming on the program, man. It was great talking to you again, and hope we can do this again. If folks want more information about what you're doing now with PsyID, how do they find you?
Just PsyID.com, PSYID.com. My email is there. I do answer emails, so feel free to reach out to me.
All right, John. Thank you, sir, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Yep, hopefully. Thanks.
All right, John Cardillo joining us. Thank you, sir. When we come back after the break, Ken Hansen joining us from Buckeye Farms Association. We'll be right back with more NRA News, Cam and Company right after this.